changes I'm going through in my life will change me forever. Soon I'll have anybody I want and give them the love that I have. I'm not as strong as I thought. I can't fight. I don't think I can make it alone. By Brandon.
On New Year's Eve 1993 in Humboldt, Nebraska, 3 people, Brandon Teena, Philip Devine, and Lisa Lambert, were shot dead in cold blood by John Lauder and Tom Nesson. The event was witnessed by Miss Lambert's young child. Nesson then stabbed Teena in the chest to ensure he was dead. This haunting event was one that followed another. During a Christmas Eve party the week prior, Teena was sexually violated and then gang raped by the same 2 men he once would call friends. The story made headlines, but much to the public discourse sensationalized Brandon Teena's status as a transgender man. The event was a hate crime, and media coverage at the time was largely irresponsible and insensitive. Less than 6 years passed before the story was adapted into the narrative film Boys Don't Cry, directed by Kimberly Peirce, and starring Hilary Swank as Brandon Teena. For the most part, the film received critical acclaim, and was generally well liked by the LGBT+ community. However, in recent years, the film has been seen in a less favorable light, receiving its fair share of retrospective criticism. There are many transgender people who feel moved by the film's representation, and many others exploited and disturbed.
This is before I really knew that trans men existed. And watching the film recently, I felt super connected to Brandon, to go bumper surfing, right? To be drinking beers, to be opening doors for girls, and he gets to live that.
Nothing can go wrong if we're together.
It took me a long time to come around to watch it, but then when I did, it was like terrifying.
I hear people say, but it's based on a true story. But why is this the kind of story that gets told over and over again?
And I went in and watched that movie, and I was blown away. It resonated so deeply for me.
Personally, I do like this film, I admit it, but I will do my best to act in good faith and consider the opposition as I assess contemporary criticism. Experiences differ, as do perceptions. This is largely why recent discourse over this film fascinates me, and why I want to contribute to it. So let's dive in. The film may be dated, but why wouldn't it be? It was 1999, and now, at the time of this recording, it's 2021. The United States has made progress, sure, but don't pat yourself on the back so soon for society taking minimal steps toward basic human dignity. Now, I think one of the most problematic aspects of the film comes from how it deviates from real-life events, in that it reframes a triple murder as a double murder, completely erasing the already underreported death of Black American Philip Devine.
If you can imagine the terror of sitting in that other room, listening to 2 people die, and know, he had to know, he was next.
In reality, there was and is unity within oppressed groups. But the film downplays the extent of real-world bigotry, underpinning and intersecting marginalized communities. The reason could very well be for the purpose of narrativizing the event in a more focused manner, seeing that they also cut Lana Tisdale's sister from the story. But regardless, the effect and implication remains. I mean, is this not Black erasure? Is this erasure not a form of racism? The argument can be made.
Again, this is taking away representation and telling me that I can't exist in my Blackness, in my queerness, and my transness. I can't bring all of this in at the same time.
Brandon Teena's relationship with Lana Tisdale is romanticized in the film, which admittedly makes for a good story, but Tisdale was likely more transphobic than her characterization leads on. While she reportedly remained friends, she said that she did not continue dating him. Unfortunately, reality is often more cruel than the media leads on.
We have come a long way.
The production of the film is questionable, with Kimberly Peirce intentionally seeking out new talent, but ultimately not casting a transgender man in the role. I don't expect everyone behind the scenes to be the most politically conscious, but I remember hearing some of the crew commenting on the film, and they quite clearly view Brandon Teena as female posing as male, as the media painted him as doing back in the early 90s. Judging by interviews at the time, Peirce has employed erroneous feminine pronouns and descriptors to identify Brandon Teena, even if one can infer what she actually meant.
You know, I was always interested in women who had passed as men, who were like pirates and adventurers, sailors, like kind of throughout time. And I was writing a script on another person who passed as a man, and I probed into it and found out that this woman actually was doing it to survive. And I was more interested in stories of identity. So I picked up the Village Voice in April of 1994, and I just read this extraordinary story, you know, the life and death of Brandon Teena. And that's the story of a girl who dressed up as a boy and went out, you know, asked girls out, basically was looking for love and acceptance and found it. And it came to a tragic end, but kind of in the course of it, she as a boy ended up finding kind of her deeper, truer sense of herself.
As recent as 2019, she still has used objectionable terms like female-bodied. Her argument for past rhetoric towards Teena was that transmedicalism dominated the culture. By this dated logic, medical affirmation and procedures determine someone's gender, rather than it be a matter of personal identity, as is the general consensus today, a consensus that Peirce now agrees with.
What I was contemplating with Brandon was the idea that you would aim to be a female-born person and you would transition to be a trans person. But I stopped Brandon before he had surgery or hormones because we know he never got that far. The old version of transness was that you moved to the other identity.
Although passing this off as language of the time can only go so far, as Hilary Swank was fairly consistent at gendering Brandon Teena correctly. This is evident in an interview with Charlie Rose, who really did not get it, where she recognizes Teena as male.
It's when I see that, I think about Brandon so much, that Brandon was someone who was living his life the way he wanted.
Playing the role both on and off set educated her quite a bit on transgenderism.
I even had someone say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And they'd get uncomfortable because they didn't know what I was. And I think that that's a very, I think it says a lot about our society, why we're so uncomfortable by that.
From what I can tell, Swank came at it with the utmost earnesty.
I knew that if I couldn't pass as a boy, that I didn't want to do the movie. I knew I'd be doing it a grave injustice. I mean, this was someone's life.
But that does not make her casting any less dated. For those unfamiliar with the criticism, there are a few reasons why people object to cis men playing trans women, and cis women playing trans men. And it really isn't so much gatekeeping as it's often mistaken to be. For one, there is no reason to rob trans actors of opportunities that would be appropriate for them, especially considering how difficult it can be for them to get into the business in the first place, and then how rare these opportunities come. There is also the issue of reinforcing a trans person's birth-assigned gender, and ostensibly positing that a trans woman is just a man acting as a woman, or in this case, a woman acting as a man. That said, there are many pro-trans critics that will argue gender itself is in many ways performative. However, that's true for both transgender and cisgender individuals. If women are to play women and men to play men, then this praxis should be true for trans people as well. Not to give Peirce too much credit, but this argument wasn't nearly as mainstream 20-some years ago. And she did audition trans people. In fact, she spent 3 years auditioning all sorts of different people, before eventually settling on Swank. In her 2019 interview with IndieWire, she states the following.
I auditioned drag kings, I auditioned trans people, everybody. At the time, others would think it was insane that my vision of the movie was that I would cast a trans person, but I just thought, I'm gonna find somebody who lives the way Brandon does. Whatever we have to do to get there, we will.
So in particular, that movie, finding somebody, took me 3 years. I spent all my own money. I interviewed every trans person who ever wanted to audition, every butch lesbian, every genderqueer person, every actress. Suddenly we got straight actresses. Once we got that, and then we had to find that cast.
Peirce attests that she cast Swank simply because she was the best person for the role.
When I finally made the choice of the person I had chose, it was only because the person came the closest to bringing to life the person that we all wanted to bring to life. That was what the choice was based on.
This does not necessarily make the film any less problematic, dated, or whatever adjective you deem appropriate, but I do feel it's best to acknowledge the context here. Throughout the narrative, the character of Brandon is validated as male. At least, I would say so. Some objections to this claim rest on what the film chooses to focus on, with attention directed on Brandon's body in the dressing scene. The argument is that this reinforces the notion of hidden femininity, something the film continuously reminds us of. I think there is merit to this criticism, but I also think arguing the dressing scene feminizes Brandon ostensibly suggests the bodies of trans men without medical procedures are to be recognized as feminine and or female, which I don't agree with. Brandon is a man, so his body is male. Peirce is simply showing his day-to-day struggles as a transgender man, without shying away. And yes, for better or for worse, that includes buying menstrual products and binding breast.
I'm an asshole.
There are indeed several moments that draw attention to this supposed femininity. At a few points, he is called a woman and female-coded words without it being corrected.
You are not a boy! That is what went wrong! You are not a boy!
Tell them that. They say I'm the best boyfriend they ever had.
John comments on his supposedly tiny hands, that he in turn insecurely defends as being big.
You have got the tiniest hands.
No?
Yeah.
They're big.
And Candace notes, he is really good with children.
God, you're really good with kids. Yeah.
These moments don't necessarily invalidate Brandon as being a man, but they surely draw attention to what John and Tom eventually perceive as artifice.
The fact is, little dude, when it comes right down to it, you're nothing but a goddamn liar, am I right?
No.
You know what we do to liars?
No, you guys.
But at the same time, it does reflect harsh reality, where even in one's best efforts to seek validation, they are not fully accepted, and seemingly trivial things can set off insecurities, even if no harm or implication is consciously meant. Although, there is something to be said following the rape scene and how Brandon is characterized and perceived by Lana. It may seem trivial, but Lana calls him pretty, which isn't inherently female-coded, but often is taken as such.
You're so pretty.
This is a clear contrast to her calling him the male-coded handsome earlier.
You're so handsome.
Although she did indeed call him handsome after learning that he may not be a cis man. But here she is calling him pretty, which may indicate that she's viewing him as female. Although, she actually referred to him as pretty beforehand, before ever knowing he was transgender, framing him as a pretty boy in her eyes.
You're so pretty.
Either way, Lana is feminizing Brandon to some extent. More problematic is during her final words to him, in which she refers to him as Teena, and not Brandon.
Teena!
It's unlikely she meant his last name, so then she probably began perceiving Brandon as female, giving some credence to the reading of the film as misguided lesbian romance. From what I can tell, though, the real-life Lana Tisdale did begin perceiving Brandon Teena as female, which may be why they broke up, as she didn't consider herself a lesbian. Though, to be clear, she wouldn't technically be a lesbian in that situation anyway. Based on some comments and her personal connection to the material, I think Peirce's idea here is to move past gender binary and recognize two people as being merely two people. But in the process of conveying that, the script arguably employs invalidation of preferred identification. So then, the film's framing of their romance warrants evaluation and questioning of intent. The way I always interpreted these scenes, however, is that despite Lana being the only person around who understands Brandon on an emotional level, she still doesn't quite get it. Brandon reacts with emotional ambivalence after being called pretty, which may suggest being overwhelmed by the compassion she is showing him, but also feeling a sense of disconnect between how he is perceived and who he is.
You're just saying that because you like me.
That is, at least, how I took it. The same goes with Lana referring to Brandon as Teena in the end. Brandon's last word to Lana in the letter is Brandon, thus reaffirming his male identity that was in many ways rejected or downplayed by both those who hated and loved him. This answers the question Lana asked him upon their first meeting.
Who are you?
He is not only Brandon, he is always and forever Brandon.
Love always and forever. Brandon.
Now, this affirmation is arguably challenged by the film's most egregious moment of gender invalidation, which occurs in the credits of all things. Brandon Teena is dead-named in parentheses, alongside his chosen name. Even if this is to respect his legal name, or name given by his parents, or whatever, as far as I can tell, this isn't simply dated. It's just careless and irresponsible. Dead-naming even becomes a point of conflict within the very text, and is largely what incited the hate crimes.
What I'm wondering about is the name. Brandon? Teena?
Boy, I really fucked up.
You would think they wouldn't go so far as to dead name, but alas, they did. Do I think this was done out of malice? No, but it's done out of ignorance, which has just about the same effect. At least it is in parentheses, placing it as a secondary name rather than primary. Nesson's real name is given alongside Tom, put into parentheses, suggesting Tom isn't his real name, but is something he is also known by. Thus and so, Teena Brandon isn't Brandon Teena's real name, but is something he is also known by. So then, technically, the film implies once again Brandon Teena is his real name. It's just a poor method of doing so. As problematic as it may be, it's still much better than his gravestone, which features his dead name and the epitaph, daughter, sister, and friend. This is not to defend the dead naming in the film by any means, but instead to contextualize it. But I digress. The criticism is warranted. So then, is the character of Brandon validated as male throughout? Not consistently, no. But for the most part, well, yes, I would still confidently say he is. The entire narrative rests on his male identity, his struggles in being accepted by society that judges him, and then the violence he receives for being a transgender man. Despite how dated and shallow elements are to the contemporary eye, we must question the authenticity of the film and the director behind it before concluding one thing or another. The recent narrative that I see thrown around towards this film is that Kimberly Peirce misappropriates a trans man's life and death story and frames it as a lesbian romance, largely because she is an out-of-touch, cisgender, lesbian, radical feminist. Here's the problem, though. She's not.
I don't identify as a lesbian because I'm genderqueer. At that point, in the late 1990s, the only language I had available to me was this word lesbian that never felt right. I was always a female-bodied person, but I didn't think of myself as a fully female-identifying person. We didn't have the word genderqueer.
Of course, because that was an extension of where I was going. I was just coming out as, it's funny, the terms have changed. I was gay, right, homosexual, but I also was, you wouldn't even have the word then, but I was what we would call genderqueer.
Peirce makes it clear that she is genderqueer. The genderqueer identity tends to fall under the transgender and non-binary umbrella. Thus, to assert that she does not understand transgenderism at all is to erase her genderqueer experiences, right?
There had never been anything like this, but it was interesting to me because I thought, I wanted to write it from a trans point of view and cast a trans person. And at some point, Kate Bornstein said, I think you're trans. And I said, oh. And when I saw what Brandon did, it was as Schrader said, because he was my teacher, he's like, this is the perfect thing for you to write about because you have the ability to transform.
That's not to suggest she fully understands Brandon Teena's experiences, however. But it should, at the very least, put the film more into context and count for something.
It was also a great story. The Brandon story was a continuation of my homosexual desire and my genderqueerness. I was trying to understand myself, and there was no language for me. So in many ways, Boys Don't Cry was my articulation of my own self and my friends, because I have many friends who once identified as lesbians and now identify as trans men.
The old version of transness was that you moved to the other identity. I've always been very much in the middle on the continuum and happy with my weirdness. And only now is the culture starting to say that maybe we don't want to live in the binary, which for me, I've always thought ultimately was the healthiest thing for a patriarchal situation.
So in fact, Boys Don't Cry is actually a very personal story for Kimberly Peirce and her journey with genderqueerness, and falling outside the traditionally recognized cis-normative binary of man and woman. Ultimately, I think Boys Don't Cry, while far from perfect, is more authentic than people in recent years lead on. And yes, that includes its depiction of sexual violence. Okay. For whatever reason, rape seems to be a recurring topic on this channel, and it's not one that I am particularly inclined to shy away from anytime soon. But right there, we can identify something about me that differs from many. I have thick skin, and can take a lot on screen. I have an interest in artistic depictions of dark and sensitive subject matter. Others do not share the sensibility, and that's perfectly okay. Perceptions differ, and tastes differ. For the most part, I am not going to be the one to tell you what you should and shouldn't be offended by. Rape, in particular, is such a contentious topic. Now, in Boys Don't Cry, Brandon is consistently framed as the victim, and we see the tragic events unfold from his point of view. He is shaken by the event, and he is encouraged to recall it once more in graphic detail. Even with this framing, some find the sequence of events exploitative, and I can sort of see why, just based on what is shown and the fact that this is based on a real-life hate crime. However, I still don't quite see it that way. How someone responds to and engages with such a scene is their call, but I will argue that before making claims as to the intentions and authenticity of the director, we must first consider what she has to say about the topic.
After being asked, why did you put the rape in the film? I said, because Brandon was raped. And he said, what if it makes people feel bad? I said, well, I'm a Jew. If I tell a story about the Holocaust, it makes me feel bad that the Holocaust happened. It would make me feel bad to see Jewish bodies getting destroyed, but what would I be doing if I didn't show the danger? I might be encouraging the violence. You cannot take the rape out just because it makes people uncomfortable. If you take it out, then you're saying that rape is not a big deal or he didn't get raped. I completely understand and respect there are sensitivities to the film, and they may evolve over time. Different people may have various sensitivities to different things in the movie. But if you look at the arguments, does it reflect on how a movie is actually made, and what choices are made? That's number one. Any of this talk about violence, I will go toe-to-toe with anybody. Given that I'm a survivor of physical and sexual abuse, I am deeply passionate about never creating what I call pornography of violence. I never want to create a situation where you see the person I'm having violence unleashed upon in a way that makes you disrespect that person or makes you want to unleash violence upon another human. Every day I shot, I just kept saying to myself, am I adding to violence? No. I believe I'm adding to humanity, and that's the responsibility we carry on our shoulders.
So when they raped Brandon over and over and over and killed Brandon, I felt terrible about that. I was sad, but I also thought, well, I have to have the courage to go and understand that if I'm going to make a movie about it and if I'm really going to ever have any chance of engaging with it. So as much as I hated the violence, I thought it was my obligation to know it inside and out. And the way I know something inside and out is like an engine. I put it together, I take it apart. People are having a little bit too much of your rape scene. And I say, yeah, but Brandon got raped all night long. I mean, this is like a 5-minute rape scene. What, they can't deal with this? That's my immediate feeling as the artist and as the person who wants to honor Brandon. Then I get to laying in bed thinking, maybe I'm not honoring Brandon if I'm honoring my own appetite and ability to withstand violence, but maybe the masses, it's like I'm doing something to them that is not taking them into the story. It might actually be taking them out. We wanted to get to the point where generally, you can't satisfy everybody, but generally people watched and didn't look away, right? Because let's say I did create the explosion bomb, right? I did create something pornographic, I did create something sensational when I only took my own temperature. And now think about it. People say, but you should make art for yourself. But not if you're actually, I don't think you make art for yourself. I think you make art in collaboration with an audience. And I don't think you make it just for the audience. I think it's this weird relationship that you form. So I think that that rape scene is the collaboration of me and the audience. If it was just for my viewing pleasure, it would be more violent.
So there you have, in her own words, the director's plea for artistic expression that, from my best judgment, is authentic. Seeing she is also a transgender person and survivor of sexual abuse. The quotes pretty much speak for themselves. To reject rape from the story is to reject reality, thereby trivializing rape. You can agree or disagree, but at least consider Peirce's point of view. I know I do, and for the most part, I agree with it. Now, yes, the scenes of sexual violation are long and cruel, but I also think they should be. This is an honest, well, mostly honest, and brutal exploration of a transgender man's story, and the cruelty and violence that he endured. Do we want to see such bad things happen to queer people in media? No. But sometimes we should, because we must confront reality for all its darkness. But there's more to his life than his violation, rape, and murder. There are moments of something brighter. In the film, Brandon finds temporary solace among his group of friends. And then, of course, Lana. The male gaze is used to affirm his identity, as it should be. Unfortunately, those moments of warmth only last for so long. Do I think the film contributes to real-world bigotry and violence anyway? Well, potentially. I've mentioned several counts of microaggressions the film itself incorporates. Sometimes it's not a matter of it incorporating the microaggression, but the way that it is then perceived. Trans people, and especially trans men, are severely underrepresented. So the fact that one of the few popular representations serves as a representation for all trans men and all trans people, and it's tragic, of course there's going to be some backlash, especially if not everything is done right. One common logical inconsistency I see rear its head in criticism is the notion that film should represent the world for how it ought to be, rather than for how it is. Some directors object to this, and it is clear that Peirce was aiming to depict it for how it is. Sure, not every trans person's life climaxes in this dark tragedy, but that was Brandon Teena's life. Now, with a long withstanding history of trans people either framed as deceivers, as dangerous, or as tools of tragedy, the public is in desperate need of challenging that status quo, and thus giving trans people more respect, affirmation, and opportunities, both on and off the screen. Although I do think it is important to address the other side of the coin here. Boys Don't Cry is a polarizing affair, but there are many people who do love it and feel represented by it, and for good reason. So, as is often the case, criticism is definitely warranted. However, sometimes it is a bit misguided. That's my taking away.
My feeling is that it's a story that everyone can relate to. And I think that people are finding something within Brandon that's within themselves. And, a lot of people say, well, he's transgendered or he's gay, but you're not. So what did you find within Brandon to be able to play and relate to? And For me, that was Brandon was someone who followed his dream.
Special thanks to my patrons, Yaka Regenoi, Pseudomoron, George, Greg, Adam Young, Matt Harrison, Wolfgang, and Kayla. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do, please like, subscribe, and share my work around. If you'd like to see your name in future videos, consider donating to my Patreon. Bye-bye.